Mark, and thank all of you for being here tonight, and especially the folks who've been behind making this course happen for the last several years. Josh, Alice, and Bob, and Gary, and a bunch of other folks who've really made this course happen. And thinking about the movement that Gary mentioned, that Mark mentioned, there is change in the air, and I want to spend a little time this evening kind of thinking about where that change has come from and how it's developed. And as Mark said, a lot of my beginnings in agroecology, I guess, began in southern Mexico, side by side with traditional Mayan farmers, in what I'll call an intercultural adventure, sharing different forms of knowledge, sharing different experiences, different ways of looking at the world we manage in our hands that we call farms. So beginning here with a little bit of talk about this term, agroecology, and a definition that I've used for a long time, using ecology, the principles and concepts of ecology, to design and manage sustainable agroecosystems. That's kind of the oldest definition, I think, and it has appeared in many forms. It has several parts to it. Ecology, the science of how nature works. I like to think about it that way. And we take that science and we use it to design agroecosystems, food systems, farms, places to produce and grow food. And once we've designed them, we manage them. We manage them using the same principles and concepts. And behind all of it is this term agroecosystem, the term that, gosh, I guess it has its roots in the early 1970s, coming from ecologists, but my main experience was it coming from a maestro, a guy who was a Mexican indigenous person, trained in ethnobotany, an agronomist who looked at farms as food systems, as agroecosystems. And then the term sustainability, one that I think you all have been reading about, thinking about, and trying to live maybe in the way you approach your own food. Sustainability, a real important part of the definition of agroecology. But then what do we have to look forward to when we have this global food system? Food produced all year round, everywhere on the shelf at the market. How did that come about? Is that agroecology? And how does our agroecological understanding help us look at this system of food and help us look at large-scale monoculture, genetically modified corn in the central part of this country and in other parts of the world as well? Single crop stands as far as you can see, where everything is focused on production. And it's not even directly food. Something to think about. And how different that is from the food system, the farm that was one of my major teachers in southern Mexico. The traditional corn, bean, squash intercrop, the Three Sisters, and where we did some of our first agroecology, side by side, participating with farmers in their fields, with their crops, with their seeds, with their practices, and with our science, sharing different forms of knowledge, an intercultural experience that taught us both about the science of agroecology and the practice of agroecology. This system, gosh, I could talk all night about it. All of the things going on, interactions, relationships, symbioses, mutualisms, incredible stuff happens in that system as the result of a long-term cultural practice of observation, trial and error, choosing what works best, local adaptation in a cultural context. So agroecology, thinking about the ecosystem concept. If you study ecology, it's first thing you look at, an ecological system of interacting living and non-living components. And we've taken that concept and expanded it to the agroecosystem, which I like to think of as an ecosystem with a purpose, with a purpose of producing food. And now we're seeing it's a multifunctional purpose, producing a lot of other environmental services as well that I'll talk a little bit about. Interesting to think about. I used to argue with ecologists about how agroecosystems are really much, much more complex than ecosystems. And they say, what do you mean? They're simplified ecosystems. I said, no, they're not. They have the component that complicates them, which is people. Yeah? So they are pretty darn complex. And using the ecosystem sort of diagram on the right, you know, that's something that's been standard since Eugene Odum first published his ecology book in the 1950s. This idea of interacting components, capturing solar energy, converting it to plant matter, being consumed, being transformed to other matter, storing energy for a period of time, cycling nutrients, levels of complexity and relationship and interaction that drives ecosystem. And we take that concept and we think about how the consumption in markets where we produce to remove from the system, how it changes the ecological character of a system, and how we've compensated for that loss from the system that normally would be recycled within the system by a whole set of incredible human inputs, especially fossil fuel-based inputs, to keep those systems functioning. But as a result of comparing these two pieces, gosh, I like to think about a general principle. It's not a law, it's not a rule, but it's something that's guided my thinking, that the closer we design an agroecosystem to the way nature is designed in that place, the more likely that it's going to be sustainable, or at least more sustainable. Use nature as our model in designing that system, but then taking that nature as model component and adding a cultural component to it, and do something that I like to call cultural agroecology, linking culture and ecology through an intercultural process. That intercultural process of sharing different ways of knowing, of learning, of understanding the nature that we live in and work with. And it takes forms like diversity versus simplicity in terms of genetic variability in a system. And instead of a single line in a system, multiple lines in time and space. Or dependency versus autonomy, ecological and cultural terms, where a system can develop resilience and food security, a home garden system in southern Mexico, a small area, probably smaller than this room, producing 125 to 150 different species of plants, 5 or 6 or 7 animal species, all integrated in an agroecosystem called a tropical home garden. Or this system, which looks pretty much like a forest, but I like to call it a coffee forest, a community we work with in northern Nicaragua, where multiple layers, multiple relationships, the key crop from a cash perspective is coffee, integrated into that system, but it allows for a closed, self-sufficient system rather than an open, input-intensive system based on a whole lot of ecological and cultural relationships, to a landscape level of a whole community where traditional versus industrial approaches to agriculture come together in a multifunctional landscape with home gardens close to the homes and small fields with individual crops or mixed crops for market and home consumption, in an area for animals close to the river or to the lake, and then mountainside agriculture in a forest reserve, all considered part of a multifunctional agricultural or human landscape. And out of that, the first edition of my textbook came out in the 1997, I think it was. And you notice the cover was that traditional corn, bean, squash system, reminding me the importance of that system and how it exemplifies agroecology to a certain extent, both ecologically and culturally, and focusing on the ecological processes in a sustainable agriculture. Using agroecology, then, in a process of transition, of change, or conversion of a non-sustainable system to a sustainable system. When I came to Santa Cruz in the end of 1980, and shortly thereafter started working with this crop, strawberries. 1985, we started a project with a grower to produce organic strawberries. What do you mean? Everybody grows organic strawberries. Well, at that time, we were told, you can't do it. Don't even bother. Well, this farmer was committed to doing it. He had a whole history of reasons why he wanted to move in that direction. We had the idea of understanding the transition process. How different from conventional fumigated strawberry fields, monoculture strawberries, as far as you can see, and the ecological impacts of that fumication, just to think about how agroecology can look at a system like that to tell you what's not working as much as it can to tell you what is. And so we set up with the farmer on his field, with his practices, his experience, and our science, a side-by-side comparative trial of a piece of land in conversion from conventional management, happened to have a long history of Brussels sprouts, into strawberries, side by side. Studied everything we could because we didn't know what we were going to find in terms of transitions in that time. Underground, above ground, insects, diseases, nutrients, plant response, yields, fruit quality, you name it, we looked at it. And came up, while we were doing the study, doing an economic analysis as well.